All right, so this, I believe, may be the last one. This is number 8. And this one has to do with different ways, some language, some terms about different ways that different racial groups interact or could relate. Intergroup, there it is right there, intergroup relations. All right, so moving from the top, which is the most egalitarian, to the most inhumane, I guess, for lack of a better word. So this word here, pluralism, sometimes referred to as multiculturalism. And this idea is that you have these different racial groups. Oh, so this one, the melting pot metaphor is the idea that all these groups kind of come together and they coexist, or maybe they even make into something else. And sociologists say, that ain't how it works. That even when there's a bunch of groups that come together, it's more likely that some groups are regarded as better. Or, like, a good example is you travel to a big city and somebody says, "Oh, yeah, go over to Chinatown, but I wouldn't go over there after dark. It's better to go to Little Italy after dark." Or if you're going to get a taxi cab, that's so outdated. If you're going to get a taxi cab, make sure you get them from the guys from Turkey, not the guys from Russia, because they're just, more honest. That's what so that means you got all these different groups and they're all interacting, but they're not all treated the same, right? So what sociologists would argue and others is that it's not really a melting pot. It's not that we've all kind of come together. It's really more like a salad. And it's a salad. And this is a kind of an interesting metaphor too, and if you've ever had when you have a salad, that some bites taste better than others. If you have that ingredient and that ingredient, that's a preferred bite than if you have that ingredient and that ingredient. Like I like my cheese and my carrots and all right. So that's what I mean by pluralism versus multicultural. Plural is there's a bunch and they're ranked. I think I always get those two confused. Those terms kind of get mixed up. Assimilation, we've talked a little bit about assimilation. This is kind of another group comes, but they're allowed to kind of conform, right? To assimilate, that's probably a better melting pot. Amalgamation, maybe that's the better melting pot. Amalgamation is sort of the same ways that they come and they take on the ways of the dominant group. It's kind of almost as if they don't exist. Segregation can be either de facto or de jure. De facto is they have to, right, by the law, they have to live in certain neighborhoods, which is considered illegal, but there's still a lot of segregation, maybe because houses are more expensive. I mean, that's one way that we can influence who lives here is we raise the prices so only wealthy people who's more likely to be wealthy, right, can stay out. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as self-segregation, but the question even about if self-segregation is would somebody really go over there if they knew? Like, I used to use this example. I used to have an assignment where you had to describe like a place, and people would often describe cafeterias at big high schools, right? And they claimed that the students were self-segregating themselves, like all the Asian students were sitting over here. But a sociologist would question if there's such a thing. How would that black student who showed up over here to all the white students, how would they be treated? Would they be welcome? Would they be encouraged? And vice versa. If they wouldn't be encouraged, it's not necessarily self. That's more like de jure. I think expulsion and population transfer. So these, if when the dominant group wants to make the subordinate groups go away, or doesn't like them, or wants control, they may start by segregating them. Think about the Second World War and the Holocaust. We put people, we said, nope, you can't live here. You have to wear this star. You can't have these jobs. So we first start by segregation, and we make that the law. Then we might move to expulsion or population transfer. And expulsion, direct or indirect. So when we talk about deportation, that's a form of expulsion. We are forcing a group of people. Matter of fact, not only are we forcing you to leave, but we will take you there. And that's population transfer. Right, is we go collect a group of people and we force them. We see this predates. This usually happens before a form of genocide. We put the Jews on the trains, we move them all over someplace else, and then we kill them. We did this during the Second World War when we forced population transfer Japanese Americans. We put them in internment camps. We did this with the Native Americans. We forded the Trail of Tears. First, we put them in reservations. First, we segregated. Then we moved them someplace else. And eventually, we darn near extinguished them. And that's what genocide is. Genocide is a systematic way of exterminating a group of people. A very timely topic on genocide is what's happening with Israel and Palestine, right? Gaza, or West Bank, where people are forced to live. They have to live there, right? Then we start bombing, or then they start bombed, and now they're forced to move because it's too dangerous to live here. And eventually it is potentially possible that the people that live there will be so few of them, it is a form of systematic extermination. We force them to a place, and then we blockade humanitarian aid. People will die in large numbers, and when you kill a large number of people, or a large percentage of a group of people, that's what we mean by genocide. So first we separate them. We make them stay. Then we may even move them or force them to leave, and eventually we kill them. That's what genocide is. These last two slides are really about the relations in the United States, and I'm just gonna briefly. These percentages are no doubt outdated. A little bit outdated, but the relative relationship is the same. Right, the majority of white people, barely, I think it's barely. What you want to look at really, I think is interesting, is this: what happens over time. So between 2015 and 2065, it's estimated that the relative percentage of white people in the United States is going to decline, and the relative percentage of Hispanic Americans, and these are people with it depends on how you define it, because in some cases it refers to the group of people from the Latin American nations. In other places, it refers to people who are from Spain. I believe Hispanics refer to people who are from Spain. Latino refers to people who, and then there's also a notion about what language is Spanish, right? I think that's, it's quite confusing to me as an Anglo, and I am an Anglo, right? So that term is referred to as Anglo-Saxon. I'm actually a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Protestant means you're non-Catholic, and historically, if you ever hear the term blue blood, not the Blue Blood, the TV show, the police officer, but blue bloods were the European Americans who were not Catholic who immigrated to the United States, or before it was the United States. That's what we mean by blue blood, or WASP. Then you have a group called white ethnics, and white ethnics are basically white people who are not from England and not Protestant. So, and what is interesting in American history is that depending on the migration wave, the way we treat the new immigrants is pretty much always the same, right? So the Irish ethnic showed up and didn't like the way they talked, didn't like the way they structured their life. They had Catholics. They drank a lot of vodka. Vodka. I don't remember. Anyway, maybe it wasn't vodka. No, it doesn't matter. But the stereotypes and the prejudices that get applied to them. Polish. I think there's a quiz question about a white ethnic group, and basically it's any white group who's not English and Protestant. Then African Americans, and again, I typically don't refer to Black people as African Americans because not all Black people come from Africa. And for a lot of African Americans, they were here before my people. So they are more American than I am. And I don't call myself a European American. So I tend to use Black. And I'm also of the mind that Black is a proper term and it should be capitalized, because we categorize people based on those. There's some sociologists that argue that class is more powerful than race. And that we basically the experience of a poor Black man is different. No, I'm sorry, the other way around. The experience of a poor white man is fundamentally different than the experience of a rich black man, and that it's class, they argue, that what predicts their life more than race. Again, that speaks to that intersectionality thing. Oh, another thing I wanted to point out on this slide is you'll notice right here that for Black Americans, the percentage is almost always the same. So that percentage doesn't change. This percentage is going down. Part of that has to do with white people are not having 2.3 babies. That's the reproduction. That's the a replacement fertility rate. Hispanic people are more likely to have larger families. That has some to do with Catholic traditions, and then Asian Americans and Asian too. I think that's on the next slide. When we talk about Asian Americans, we've already kind of talked about them as the model minority, right? So when I was talking about positive stereotypes are the idea that a group of people have assimilated successfully. And model minority is one of those that they say it sounds good, but is not really good to think about. I mean, it's not really good to use because it puts Asian Americans at, it sort of imposes expectations and stereotypes on them. But look at this, right? Look at when we talk about Asia, really what we're talking about. Japanese people from China, India, Korea. It's a very diverse group of people. Native Americans. Oh, I should change this. I need to make this First Peoples, right? Native Americans, Indigenous, and there's also make reference to them as First Peoples, because they were the first peoples here. And Middle Eastern Americans, Libya, Turkey. When this slideshow was, years ago, there was a lot of talk about the stereotypes being attached, or the hate crimes that were directed towards Iraqi and Middle Eastern people, and some of that came out of 9/11. And then after COVID, there was a lot of antagonism towards, I believe it was Chinese Americans. And again, that kind of speaks to how prejudices are influenced by what's happening, right? So, and how our prejudices shift. Here's a fun little trivia question. The first group of people for there to be immigration quotas, any guesses? It was actually Chinese immigrants. The first immigration quotas were attached to Chinese immigrants. And yeah. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you for listening. Yeah, this kind of wraps up the chapter. So here would be the question that might show up on a quiz is the relative rank, right? And that's what this illustrates too. Larger percentage of white people from England, and then it moves sort of down the chain, and you'll notice that the indigenous, but this is another illustration of the social construction of race, is over the last 20 or 30 years, the percentage of people who are willing to, who identify as an indigenous American has actually increased. And not necessarily because of birth rate, but really more about because race is an idea. It's an idea that gets attached to people based on some sort of physical characteristic. So it's a myth because it's an idea, but people really do look different. Okay, thank you for listening.